I spent about 10 years, 9.5 years to be almost exact, at this point in time, explaining computers to the general public. And part of those explanations involved describing the software, talking about what is an operating system, for example. What is the difference between Microsoft Office and Windows? Because sometimes the terminologies get conflated, right? And so I've spoken to approximately 70,000 people. You say, wow, that's a lot. Is that realistic? Well, yes. If you break it down to approximately 25 people on average a day, 5 days a week, that averages out to roughly 125 people a week. That's on the low side. Some days there are more people than that. Some days there are less people than that. And then there's these special events where there's far more people than just 25 people a day, right? But if you look at it on a yearly basis, well, on a monthly basis, it's roughly close to 400 to 500 people a month. And then on a yearly basis, it's about 6,000 to 7,000 people a year. And then during the pandemic, I had a period of time there where between 3 or 4 months, I was actually talking to people on the phone where I had an overall number of people that I spoke to. Is about 6,000 to 8,000 people that I spoke to. And so when you look at all the people that I talked to in about a 10-year time period, that's about 70,000 people. And when I started tracking my actual sales, right? So I didn't track my sales all the way from the very beginning, which was 2013, but I started tracking them around 2019, and I ended up with about well over $5 million that I've sold. $5 million that I've sold. The top salesperson in my category. And I'm now in a position and in a role where I am training people to exceed my performance, to exceed my talents, and that will help me reach the next level when I can grow people to that level, right? And so I'm trying to create people who can exceed where I was, which I've reached the heights of. 1 year I sold approximately $1.6 million, right? And so I'm trying to craft individuals that can sell $2 million in a year. And it's not about the monetary figure. The monetary figure is a representation of the value that you've delivered to other people, right? And so in a time period that I've tracked between 2019 and 2022, I've sold well over 1,000 technical services contracts, right? Where there were services rendered to people that helped them realize the benefit and value of the electronics, primarily computer devices, that they acquired in their interactions with me, right? And so during that time frame, I've had to, and before that, right? And when you add up the entire 10-year period, let's just do an estimate, right? It's well beyond the $5 million that I've tracked, that I've sold. It's probably approaching closer to 8 million, right? But that all being said, right? I've had a lot of practice explaining to people in simpler terms what is software. So what I would say is that we all know what software is. It's the thing that you do on the computer, right? It's the program that you run. Let's say Microsoft Word or Google Chrome or Adobe Photoshop or QuickBooks, right? That's software. We all know what software is. We know that more than we would know anything else. If you look in my other video prior to this one, I talk about hardware, processor, RAM, hard drive. But software is unmistakable. But the thing about software is that in the current computers that you look at, such as Chromebooks or Windows computers, and to a lesser extent, Apple computers, right? But primarily Microsoft Windows computers, what you see is that you have a system of automatic updates that flow into the computer. And these automatic updates are going to change the personality or change some aspect of the software that was originally on the computer when you acquired it. When you open up Task Manager, and you can do this by pressing Control-Alt-Delete on any Windows computer, you open up Task Manager, oftentimes what you'll see is that on a Microsoft Surface computer, you have about 50 background programs running at the same time. On any other computer, for the most part, on average, let's say on 90% of the computers that you do Control-Alt-Delete and then you choose Task Manager, you're going to see close to 100 programs running at the same time. So your computer could just be sitting there doing absolutely nothing. You haven't opened up any programs at all, right? So you haven't opened up any programs at all, and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, computer is fine. But while you're looking at that blank desktop, there's 100 programs running behind the scenes. And you're like, okay, when you actually open up Task Manager, you look at that and you see that, oh, all these programs are using 50%, 70% of the RAM, of the memory. You're like, wow, I got 8 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes of RAM on my computer. I am sitting pretty in 2023. And then you look at that and you're like, wow, all that memory is being used by those programs, and I haven't even launched or run my programs yet. I haven't ran my programs yet. And then when you run your programs, your programs, if they're what you might call a simple program, in at least what we would say simple in 2023, Microsoft Edge is going to use 1 to 2 gigabytes of memory for 1 to 5 tabs, right? Okay, 1 gigabyte out of 8 isn't too bad. But when 50 to 70% of the memory is being used by those other 100 programs, right? You're like, man, I hope I don't end up running anything more than that. But the thing is that due to those updates, because of those updates, the amount of memory that's going to get used is going to go up. It's going to go up. It's going to go up over the years. And so that is part, but not the entire story of why the computer starts slowing down, right? And so it's like the more capacity you have on the computer, better processor, better quality RAM, not just more RAM, and a better SSD, and a great circuit board that is coordinating all these things together, right? Then that is going to help you with that longevity on those devices, right? And so that's why it is not very clear at the outset why certain computers that you might call lower end computers, right? Might call them cheap computers, lower end computers. They don't do as well long-term or longevity wise as some of the mid-level or upper level computers, right? And so if you're sitting there and you're trying to get this computer for a very good cost, right? For very good cost, and you're like, okay, wow, 2 years later, 3 years later, but usually less than that, this computer is not doing well for me. I'm trying to run these programs and it's just not doing well for me. Either my needs changed, but most certainly the computer changed through all these updates. Because one time I met a person, they had a computer running Windows Vista on it, and it ran perfectly. He had it for almost 10 years. It was an E-Machines, beige E-Machines laptop, ran perfectly. This dude never connected it to the internet. It ran perfectly fine. Dude never connected it to the internet. Keeping the computer disconnected from the internet is impractical, because that's how you get your updates, your security updates. That's how you connect to websites in the world, and you do all this other stuff, right? And so your computer changing is inevitable. So that's why the quality of the computer degrades. It's not just the physical that I talked about in the previous video. It's also the software and how it changes, it morphs, it evolves through these updates over time, and how all these background programs are just sitting there working together, consuming a lot of your memory and consuming a good share of the time on the processor. So that's something to watch for. That's something to be aware of. And I hope this information found you well.